القرآن وافترضت على عبادك فيه الصيام. صل على محمد وآل محمد وارزقني حج بيتك الحرام في عامي هذا وفي كل عام، واغفر لي تلك الذنوب العظام، فإنه لا يغفرها غيرك يا رحمن يا علام. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أفتتح الثناء بحمدك، وأنت مسدد للصواب بمنك، وأيقنت أنك أنت أرحم الراحمين في موضع العفو والرحمة، وأشد المعاقبين في موضع النكال والنقمة، وأعظم المتجبرين في موضع الكبرياء والعظمة. اللهم أذنت لي في دعائك ومسألتك، فاسمع يا سميع مدحتي، وأجب يا رحيم دعوتي، وأقل يا غفور عثرتي. فكم يا إلهي من كربة قد فرجتها، وهموم قد كشفتها، وعثرة قد أقلتها، ورحمة قد نشرتها، وحلقة بلاء قد فككتها. الحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا، ولم يكن له شريك في الملك، ولم يكن له ولي من الذل، وكبره تكبيرا. الحمد لله بجميع محامده كلها، على جميع نعمه كلها. الحمد لله الذي لا مضاد له في ملكه، ولا منازع له في أمره. الحمد لله الذي لا شريك له في خلقه، ولا شبيه له في عظمته. الحمد لله الفاشي في الخلق أمره وحمده، الظاهر بالكرم مجده، الباسط بالجود يده، الذي لا تنقص خزائنه، ولا تزيده كثرة العطاء إلا جودا وكرما. إنه هو العزيز الوهاب. اللهم إني أسألك قليلا من كثير، مع حاجة بي إليه عظيمة، وغناك عنه قديم، وهو عندي كثير، وهو عليك سهل يسير. اللهم إن عفوك عن ذنبي، وتجاوزك عن خطيئتي، وصفحك عن ظلمي، وسترك على قبيح عملي، وحلمك عن كثير جرمي، عندما كان من خطئي وعمدي. أطمعني في أن أسألك ما لا أستوجبه منك، الذي رزقتني من رحمتك وأريتني من قدرتك وعرفتني من إجابتك، فصرت أدعوك آمنا وأسألك مستأنسا، لا خائفا ولا وجلا، مدلا عليك فيما قصدت فيه إليك. فإن أبطأ عني عتبت بجهلي عليك، ولعل الذي أبطأ عني هو خير لي لعلمك بعاقبة الأمور. فلم أر مولا كريما أصبر على عبد لئيم منك عليه. يا ربي إنك تدعوني فأولي عنك، وتتحبب إلي فأتبغض إليك، وتتودد إلي فلا أقبل منك، كأن لي التطول عليك، فلم يمنعك ذلك من الرحمة لي والإحسان إلي والتفضل علي بجودك وكرمك. فارحم عبدك الجاهل وجد عليه بفضل إحسانك، إنك جواد كريم. الحمد لله مالك الملك مجري الفلك مسخر الرياح فالق الإصباح، ديان الدين رب العالمين. الحمد لله على حلمه بعد علمه، والحمد لله على عفوه بعد قدرته، والحمد لله على طول أناته في غضبه، وهو قادر على ما يريد. الحمد لله خالق الخلق باسط الرزق فالق الإصباح، ذي الجلال والإكرام والفضل والإنعام، الذي بعد فلا يرى وقرب فشهد النجوى، تبارك وتعالى. الحمد لله الذي ليس له منازع يعادله، ولا شبيه يشاكله، ولا ظهير يعاضده. قهر بعزته الأعزاء، وتواضع لعظمته العظماء، فبلغ بقدرته ما يشاء. الحمد لله الذي يجيبني حين أناديه، ويستر علي كل عورة وأنا أعصيه، ويعظم النعمة علي فلا أجازيه. فكم من موهبة هنيئة قد أعطاني، وعظيمة مخوفة قد كفاني، وبهجة مؤنقة قد أراني، فأثني عليه حامدا وأذكره مسبحا. الحمد لله الذي لا يهتك حجابه، ولا يغلق بابه، ولا يرد سائله، ولا يخيب آمنه. الحمد لله الذي يؤمن الخائفين وينجي الصالحين ويرفع المستضعفين ويضع المستكبرين ويهلك ملوكا ويستخلف آخرين. والحمد لله قاسم الجبارين مبير الظالمين مدرك الهاربين نكال الظالمين صريخ المستصرخين موضع حاجات الطالبين معتمد المؤمنين. الحمد لله الذي من خشيته ترعد السماء وسكانها وترجف الأرض وعمارها وتموج البحار ومن يسبح في غمراتها. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. الحمد لله الذي يخلق ولم يخلق ويرزق ولا يرزق ويطعم ولا يطعم ويميت الأحياء ويحيي الموتى وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وحبيبك وخيرتك من خلقك وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك أفضل وأحسن وأجمل وأكمل وأزكى وأنمى وأطيب وأطهر وأسنى وأكثر ما صليت وباركت وترحمت وتحننت وسلمت على أحد من عبادك وأنبيائك ورسلك وصفوتك وأهل الكرامة عليك من خلقك. اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين عبدك ووليك وأخي رسولك وحجتك على خلقك وآيتك الكبرى والنبأ العظيم. وصل على الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. وصل على سبطي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. وصل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلاة كثيرة دائمة. اللهم وصل على ولي أمرك القائم المؤمل والعدل المنتظر وحفه بملائكتك المقربين وأيده بروح القدس يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعله الداعي إلى كتابك والقائم بدينك. استخلفه في الأرض كما استخلفت الذين من قبله. مكن له دينه الذي ارتضيته له. أبدله من بعد خوفه أمنا، يعبدك لا يشرك بك شيئا. اللهم أعزه وأعزز به، وانصره وانتصر به، وانصره نصرا عزيزا، وافتح له فتحا يسيرا، واجعل له من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. اللهم أظهر به دينك وسنة نبيك، حتى لا يستخفى بشيء من الحق مخافة أحد من الخلق. اللهم إنا نرغب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهله، وتذل بها النفاق وأهله، وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك، وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم ما عرفتنا من الحق فحملنا، وما قصرنا عنه فبلغنا. اللهم المم به شعثنا، واشعب به صدعنا، وارتق به فتقنا، وكثر به قلتنا، وأعزز به ذلتنا، وأغن به عائلنا، واقض به عن مغرمنا، واجبر به فقرنا، وسد به خلتنا، ويسر به عسرنا، وبيض به وجوهنا، وفك به أسرنا، وأنجح به طلبتنا، وأنجز به مواعيدنا، واستجب به دعوتنا، وأعطنا به سؤلنا، وبلغنا به من الدنيا والآخرة آمالنا، وأعطنا به فوق رغبتنا يا خير المسؤولين وأوسع المعطين. اشف به صدورنا، وأذهب به غيظ قلوبنا، واهدنا به لما اختلف فيه من الحق بإذنك، إنك تهدي من تشاء إلى صراط مستقيم. وانصرنا به على عدوك وعدونا إله الحق. آمين. اللهم إنا نشكو إليك فقد نبينا صلواتك عليه وآله، وغيبة ولينا، وكثرة عدونا، وقلة عددنا، وشدة الفتن بنا، وتظاهر الزمان علينا. فصل على محمد وآل محمد، وأعنا على ذلك بفتح منك تعجله، وبضر تكشفه، ونصر تعزه، وسلطان حق تظهره، ورحمة منك تجللناها، وعافية منك تلبسناها، برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد صلى عليه محمد آل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم واستعينوا بالصبر والصلاة وإنها لكبيرة إلا على الخاشعين صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات الله محمد وعلى I've taken as a topic during these days of Ramadan that we're together, speaking about fiqh of the prayer, but looking at it from the perspective of ahadith. So each night I've been sharing with you various ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt, speaking about the prayer, helping us to understand and maybe review some of the laws of the prayer, but also in their own way helping us to motivate ourselves and maybe focus on things that we let slip through the cracks or never learned in the first place. And so the way that the Ahlul Bayt teach us the ahkam is something that's worthy of reflection, and we're endeavoring to try to go through just a sampling of some of their ahadith on the prayer during these days. Yesterday we spoke about the niyyah, so we began speaking about the prayer in general, and I shared some ahadith about the general form of the prayer, the positions of the prayer. Yesterday we started focusing on the niyyah, which is the intention that we have to have not only in prayer, but in all of our acts of worship. And so that's something important to know, that what makes an act that we do, an act of worship, is actually the intention. So there are certain acts that we're called on to do where the intention behind it is so integral that without that intention, the act itself doesn't take place. Right? So compare that to another act. I eat food. It doesn't matter if I have the intention that I'm going to derive nourishment from that food or don't have that intention. I'm going to derive it's a natural effect of eating that food that I'm going to benefit from it. Whether I'm a Muslim or a Kafir, it doesn't make a difference. Whether I make that intention and say Bismillah before the food or don't say Bismillah, the physical effects that that food is going to have are going to take place. It's not tied to intention. As opposed to acts of ibadah, worship, right? Prayer, fasting, hajj, even zakah, right? We don't necessarily think of zakah as an ibadah. We don't think of it, I think, in our American or Western context, we don't think of charity as a work of worship the same way we think of prayer or hajj and fasting and these kinds of things. But in the Islamic conception, actually, even zakah and khums are a kind of ibadah. Why? Because that intention is integral. All right, so learning about the intention, thinking about the intention and what constitutes the intention and what can mess with the intention is very important, not only for prayer, but for all of our acts of worship. So what's meant by intention? Oftentimes people have the misconception that intention means that I have to say a particular sentence in Arabic. Right? Usalli salat al-maghrib, for instance, qurbatan ila Allah. I have to say this particular formula, and that's the intention. That's not intention. What do we mean when we say I intend to do something? I have the picture in my mind, I decide that I'm going to do it, right? That consciousness and that commitment to do the act, that's your intention. So intention is not a formula. Intention is not words. The intention is the consciousness, the decision that's within yourself to do an act, right? But when you talk about the intention that's integral and necessary for an act of worship, it's not just that I want to do an act, but I have to do that act. Why? Because Allah has told me to do it. That's key. So why am I praying? I'm praying because God told me to pray. What prayer am I praying? I'm praying Maghrib prayer, for instance. If I know that, if that's in my mind as I'm beginning the act, that's my intention. I don't have to actually say words. Right? So there's no need to vocalize words. There's no need to think words. Simply the fact that I know that I'm praying my Maghrib prayer because Allah has told me to pray. That's my intention. Right? Now, the intention has to also be khalis, right? Purely for Allah. Right? And what that means in a legal sense, like you can think of that in a legal sense, or you can think of that in a more kind of akhlaqi sense, and like what's the extent of how pure can it be? So there's a gradient, but what's legally required for us to have a pure intention is that we're doing it. The only reason why I'm doing this act is because God's told me to do it. Right? So I mentioned yesterday, some acts that we do have fringe benefits. Right? So our prayer, in addition to being an act of worship, and in addition to the words that we say and the meanings behind those words, it's also kind of exercise. Right? Compare it to yoga, compare it to other kinds of Tai Chi or something like that, where you're making different movements. So you might think, well, there's some benefit in the action. So I'm praying because I like the way it stretches my back, in a particular way when I do ruku'. That's a fringe benefit, right? Maybe that also accrues when you do the prayer. But if my intention to do the prayer is because it makes me feel good and I like the way it stretches my hamstrings just right when I do ruku', that's not a prayer that's worthy of fulfilling your obligation, right? So the intention behind the prayer needs to be because God has told me to pray. Same for the fast. There are fringe benefits. There are health benefits. There's, you're consuming less. You might be, cleansing yourself. There might be other benefits that are physical. And certainly Allah, like I mentioned yesterday, Allah, when He makes things wajib on us, remember that He is doing it because of the benefit to us. Right? It's not an arbitrary rule that He just says, well, let's just, randomly say that they can't eat. That's just to test them. Just for the heck of it. That's not the way He designs the fast. Right? He knows who we are, how we are, what we're made of, what's good for us, what's bad for us, and He's decided that the fast in this particular way, this particular number of days, this particular way of fasting, this is the best thing for human beings. Right? There's physical benefit, yes. There's spiritual benefit, definitely. Like taqwa is the highest goal that He's placed on, what we get out of the fast. Right? لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you can attain the fear of God in your hearts. And so, that definitely the benefits, all physical and spiritual benefits that are in fasting are in God's mind as He's designing the fast. But now, why do I fast? Not simply because of the fringe benefits that I myself have determined or science has told me exist. I fast because God has told me to fast, knowing that He is all wise and whatever He tells me to do is the best thing for me. Right? So that needs to be our intention. We have the consciousness of what we're doing, and we're doing it because of Allah, not because of the fringe benefits. The same thing happens with these rings. Sometimes people come up with all this Christology, and the aqiq has this effect, and there's the aura, and all these different things about the effects of the ring, and that's why they wear the ring. Well, then there's no thawab in it. If you want the thawab for wearing an aqiq ring, wear it because Rasulullah's sunnah is to wear an aqiq ring. Now, why did He wear it? Well, maybe there's some benefits. Maybe there's some physical benefits. Maybe it's simply beautification. Whatever the benefits are, He did it for that reason. I'm doing it because He did it. And if that's my intention, then it becomes something that's bringing me closer to Him than necessarily bringing me closer to Allah. Now it's something that's spiritually beneficial. Whereas if I do it only because of the scientific benefit, like where science tells me that there's some benefit, then I'll do it. If science doesn't tell me there's any benefit, then I'm not going to leave that. I'm going to leave that particular action. Only God told me, not science. Right? If that's the tug of war that's in my heart, then there's something wrong with my faith, and there's something wrong with the way I'm thinking about what I'm supposed to do. So that's something about intention. And then we spoke briefly yesterday, and I'll speak a little bit more detail today, about the main impediment to a correct intention. And that is riya. Riya is, you can translate it as ostentation, doing something to show off. right? So I do something. Why? Not to please Allah, or not solely to please Allah, but I also have an eye to the fact that you're listening to me or you're watching me, and I want you to see me, and I want you to think better of me because you see me doing this. And so I'm reciting a little bit louder, reciting a little bit better voice, or whatever it is, so that you praise me and you say, mashallah, he's such a good person. Right? So when we have that kind of contamination in our intention, it destroys the act. Not only from an akhlaqi perspective, not only from an ethical perspective, but even from a fiqhi perspective, this causes trouble. Right? So if I pray my Maghrib prayer, and in that Maghrib prayer, either the entire intention or even an intention for part of the wajib acts of that prayer is because I'm trying to please someone, then not only does it detract from the thawab I get from the prayer, it actually, from a legal fiqhi perspective, it destroys the prayer altogether. We spoke a few days ago about the difference between a Sahih prayer and a Maqbool prayer. Sahih means that it's a legally correct prayer. I followed the rules. Not necessarily focused, not necessarily paid attention, but I've done all the rules. So I've checked off the box to say I've offered my prayer. Right? So Allah, the consequence of that prayer is Allah won't punish me for having not said the prayer, because I said the prayer technically. I followed the law. But a maqbool prayer is a prayer that's actually acceptable to Allah, right? Because my presence of mind was there, because I was focusing on the meaning, I had all those different kinds of things. My intention was purer. So that's what we're aiming for. This riya not only diminishes that quality of the prayer, but it actually destroys it. So it's not only is it not maqbool, it's not even sahih, it's not even correct anymore legally. And so afterwards, when I realized that I did offer the prayer, but I was trying to impress the guy next to me, I was trying to impress someone, then I need to actually go back and redo that prayer because I didn't fulfill it correctly. Right? So this is one of the areas where there's a coming together of akhlaqi principles and legal principles as well. And so we have to check ourselves and make sure that when we offer these acts of worship, we're doing them for Allah's sake and purely for His sake. I'll share a couple of hadith about the effect of riya. This is one that's narrated to us from recite with salawat. This comes to us from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam. He says, "Iyaka wa riya." Beware of ostentation. فَإِنَّهُ مَنْ عَمِلَ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ وَكَلَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَى مَنْ عَمِلَ اللَّهِ. He says, if you act for other than God, God will turn you over to Him for whom you acted, to go seek your reward from that person. Right? So if I'm not doing it for Allah's sake, but I'm doing it to garner praise from people, then in Allah's judgment, He won't say that you've done an act and I'll reward you and you can also go to other people. He'll say, you've done it for me and for them, or you've done it only for them. Go and seek your reward from them. Whatever praise you got from them, that's the end of your reward. There's nothing for me because you didn't do it for me. In another hadith also from Imam Sadiq, he says, "Man arada Allah azza wa jalla bil qalili min amalihi أظهر الله له أكثر مما أراده به." If a person does little, but does it for God, God will present him with more reward than he ever expected for his acts. Right? So Allah is not interested in quantity, He's interested in quality. Right? And so when I do something for Allah, even if the quantity is little, but I do it for Allah's sake, then Allah rewards me, and He rewards me plentifully, actually more than what I'm due. وَمَن يُعْطِ الْكَثِيرَ بِالْقَلِيلِ, one of the du'as that we recite. Right? We call out to Allah as the one who gives much for little. Right? And that's a really important principle also that we should realize. Sometimes we get into this calculation, this kind of accounting with Allah, where we feel like Allah, Imam Ali mentions ibadatul tujar, the worship of merchants. So we have to be careful we don't take that to an extreme, and we don't say, for instance, I've prayed a prayer, so now Allah owes me. Right? I've offered this, now He's gonna he's gonna reward me, right? I'm gonna kind of accrue more reward, almost like I'm accruing more money, collecting more money. Like, we should never think that we are truly earning the reward that Allah is going to give us, right? Yes, we have to try. We have to fulfill our obligations, and we have to make every effort. We have to think of it more like we have to prove to Allah that we're worthy of His mercy. That's really what we should be after. Not that I want to, do these 10 acts so that I can get 10 steps closer because I'll earn it. I now deserve 10 more steps of reward because I did 10 more acts. Our acts are never worthy of the reward that Allah gives us. We never actually earn His reward in an honest sense. Right? You can think of it, kind of maybe a watered down example would be like yourself with your parents. Now, your parents give you everything, right? At the end of the day, if you come back and say, you owe me for something, right? You have to pay me back. I give you $10. You have to pay me back $10. Yeah, they'll give it to you, and you can say your accounts are settled. But think of all the money that they've spent on you throughout your life, selflessly, right? Your lending $10 to them doesn't amount to anything compared to what they've done for you. Right? So you can never fulfill the obligation to them. You can never kind of get even with them, no matter how much righteousness you do. That doesn't mean that we don't try. We're supposed to do ihsan to our parents and try to make up for that, but we never will be able to. So with Allah, it's even a more extreme example. So we never should have this idea that we are trying to earn really paradise or earn reward. We're more trying to show Him that we're worthy of Him being generous with us. We want His grace. So whatever reward He gives us, it's not payback. It's that He's seen that I'm worthy because of my humility. And despite the fact that my act was deficient, despite the fact that the quantity was wanting, like everything was wanting about my acts, but He sees that I'm humble. He sees that I'm making an effort to try to do something to please Him. And so then He bestows on me. He gives me reward. So I haven't earned it. I've simply benefited from His grace. And this sentiment, this lesson is extremely important, and it's repeated, echoed time and time again in our du'as. This du'a, Abi Hamza al-Thumali, it's one of the most special du'as that we have, and it's probably one of the most neglected du'as that we have. Unfortunately, it's recommended for this sahar time, like for kind of pre-sahur time before Fajr in the month of Ramadan, and that's probably the worst time for most of us, that we have the least motivation, right, to be up at that time and then to engage in worship at that time. And it's a long du'a, but if you can force yourself to say it, if not at that time, then any other time during the day, right? Take some time, you can break it up over the course of the Ramadan, or you can do a couple of cycles, whatever you can do, but spend some time looking at that du'a, reading through that du'a. So one of the things that he really emphasizes on is this, that we're not worthy of Allah's reward, we're actually trying to get His grace. Right? The phrase, for instance, "Amilna bi fadlik wa la tu'amilna bi adlik," is repeated a lot, not in that dua, but in other places. We want Allah to deal with us not with His justice, but with His grace. Right? So we shouldn't even have in our mind that I've done everything. I've checked all the boxes. I've fulfilled all my obligations. I just want what's due. Just settle my account and give me the reward for what I've done. That's the wrong attitude with Allah. Right? Because if He deals with us with justice, then we're not going to get what we think we're due. Even the prayers that we think we're offering, and legally we're offering, but if through Allah's lenses, from His eyes, these are not really acts of worship. Right? Not worthy of who He is. Will He reward us for them? Absolutely. Not because we deserve it, but because out of His grace, He sees that He wants to grace us with that reward. Yeah, so that's a really important lesson or kind of just thing to remind yourself of, that we want to earn Allah's, not His reward, but His grace, so He bestows on us generously, ignores all of our faults, and gives us based on the fact that He is generous, not based on the fact that we are worthy of receiving. All right, so the hadith from Imam Sadiq says that when you do even a little bit, Allah will reward you for that little much more generously, much more plentifully than what the act itself should have deserved. But he says, if a person does much by exhausting his body, keeping vigil by night, but does it for people, right? So the quantity is there, but now the intention, which is the essential quality, is not there. Then God will refuse to give him any reward except that he will belittle his acts in the view of those who hear him, who hear of those acts. Right? So this is also an interesting thing that we see, that sometimes we expect something. We expect that if I do something, a certain reaction will come. We all want dignity. We all want people to honor us. So sometimes what we think is the best way to get people to honor us is to act very proud and arrogant. If I act dignified, then I'll be dignified. But what we see is the reality is that people don't honor me if I'm arrogant. Right? If I act arrogantly, if I act big, then everyone tries to find fault with me, everyone will push me down, people will ignore me. Actually, the way to get people to honor you is to humble yourself, to do the opposite. When you humble yourself and you lower yourself, that's when people look at you and say, they start lifting you up. They start saying, no, you're a good person. You're a person we trust. You're a person we respect. You're a person that we like to be around. They'll honor you. Why? Because you're lowering yourself. You're humbling yourself. So oftentimes things are opposite, where if you try to get at it directly, then you miss the mark. But when you follow the advice and the exhortations of Allah and His guides, then you realize that actually you have to go about it a different way. And there's a better way, the real way to get to that end is something that seems like it's in the opposite direction. So the same thing here, I want people to praise me, and because of that, I'm doing this act for them. I'm reciting a little louder, reciting a little better, doing certain things so that people will praise me. In reality, not only does Allah say, go seek your reward from them, but He also changes that relationship where they don't respect you because of what you're doing. So you think you're getting their respect by doing this act of worship in earshot of them, or in a way that they'll see what you're doing, but actually in the end they won't think well of you. They'll think lowly of you because they also realize that you're doing it for very lowly reasons and corrupt reasons. And so you don't even get, in the dunya, you don't even get what you wanted from that act that was for people and not for Allah. All right, so when things are purely for Allah, that's when we can get the desired effects. When we start to taint that intention with other things, then we actually miss the mark. Another hadith, this is quoted from a chain of the Imams, from Imam Kazim alayhi salam, from his father, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. He quotes it from his forefathers, from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. يؤمر برجال إلى النار فيقول الله لهم فيقول لهم خازن النار يا أشقياء ما حالكم. So some people on the Day of Judgment will be ordered into the hellfire. The guardian of hellfire, who's an angel, in Malik or one of his underlings, the guardian of hellfire will say, "O wretched people, what was your crime? How did you end up here in hellfire?" قالوا كنا نعمل لغير الله. They replied that we used to act for other than Allah. We did deeds for other than Allah. Because they're righteous people. Probably even the angel is maybe surprised to see you're Muslims, you're righteous people, you did good acts. Why are you in hellfire now? And so he asks them, and their response is that, yeah, we did acts, but we did them for other than Allah. And so it was said to us, فَقِيلَ لَنَا خُذُوا ثَوَابَكُم مِّمَّنْ عَلِمْتُمْ لَهُ. So it was told to us that we're not going to get the reward from Allah, rather go and seek your reward from those for whom you did your acts. So we did our acts in the dunya for dunyawi purposes. We received our reward in the form of praise of people. Now in the Day of Judgment, we're empty-handed. We have nothing to show for. And so the acts that we thought we had accrued are nothing. And now we've earned nothing but hellfire, because not only are those acts not valuable, but they're actually useless. right? Because by doing it for people through riya, we actually degrade it to the point where it's no longer even a correct prayer. We haven't even fulfilled our obligation. And one final hadith I'll share with you today. This is from Nahj al-Balagha. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, كم من صائم ليس له من صيامه إلا الجوع والظمأ وكم من قائم ليس له من قيامه إلا السهر والعناء حبذا نوم الأكياس وإفطارهم. How many are those who fast and get nothing from their fasts except thirst and hunger? And how many are those who keep the night vigil and get nothing for their vigil except sleep deprivation and fatigue? And then he says, how much better is it when the wise choose to sleep and not fast? Sleep instead of standing for worship and not fast instead of fasting. So this is also a counterintuitive kind of a statement when you first look at it. It seems like he's encouraging us not to fast, encouraging us not to worry about waking up at night and offering prayers. He's not directly saying not to fast and not to offer prayers, but what he's saying, he's comparing the two. He's saying some people who have little intellect, they do a lot, the quantity is there, but they do it for either for the wrong reasons, they certainly don't do it for Allah, and because of that, they get nothing but dunyawi effects of it. Right? So if I'm fasting, but I'm fasting for the wrong reasons, then what am I getting out of it? I'm hungry. That's the end, that's the result. So I suffer from the hunger, but there's no benefit. I'm not getting taqwa. I'm not developing my own character. I'm not pleasing Allah. I'm not earning reward. The end result is just the fatigue and the hunger of fasting. I wake up and pray, but if I'm doing it for wrong reasons, and wrong reasons doesn't mean only that I'm doing it for someone else. It could also be that I'm miscalculating. I'm neglecting, for instance, duties. Right? So say I do mustahab fast throughout the year, but because of that, I can't fulfill my obligations to work or to family or to whatever else. Right? So I'm neglecting other obligations that I have so that I can offer these mustahab fasts. I miscalculated. This is a foolish calculation. Right? We can never make up through nawafil and through mustahabbat for the neglect of wajibat and actual obligations. We have to first fulfill our obligations, and then as extra credit above and beyond the obligations, not only obligations in terms of like praying our 5 prayers and those kinds of things, all of our obligations, supporting the people we're supposed to be supporting, taking care of all our obligations financially and towards family and towards community and all these different things. Once we fulfill those, then comes the time for over and above mustahabbat. Or if we can do the mustahabbat and not interfere with all those obligations, then that's also fine. But when we do one but we neglect the other, then there's no benefit. So he says it's much better what a wise person does, one with good intellect. What he does is he makes a good calculation. Maybe he'll decide that I shouldn't fast right now. Because if I fast, I know that I'm not going to be able to fulfill my obligations. Now, of course, that's not the wajib fast, that's mustahab fast. The wajib fast you have to do regardless. Right? So during Ramadan, even if you're tired and you end up having to sleep and neglect something, you still have to do it. You have to make other calculations and figure out how you can eat better or how you can sleep better or whatever you have to do to fulfill all the obligations to the best of your ability. The fast has to happen. Right? So we're not talking about the wajib fast, but mustahab fasts throughout the year. Right? I should make the right calculation and realize that I need the energy to fulfill these obligations, and I can't fulfill them well if I'm fasting, for instance, and so I'm not going to fast. Or, no, I can do both. I can fulfill those obligations and fast. Now that's the time to offer the fast. Or I have no other obligations. It's a weekend, it's a holiday, it's a lighter day, so now I can fast, and I'm not cutting corners anywhere. I'm not failing on any of my obligations. So now this is the time to take advantage of fasting and doing whatever other worship I want to do. All right, so these are some of the hadith that we have on riya. I'll share a couple of others starting tomorrow, inshallah. We'll end with a dua. Let's ask Allah to help us to fulfill these obligations to Him, especially in our prayers, and to help us to do them with a pure intention for His sake and because He has commanded us. And please Allah protect us from this disease of riya, of ostentation, of doing things for other than you. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Jazakallah Maulana. May Allah give us tawfiq to understand, comprehend these valuable lessons, and may we walk in the path of Ahl Bayt alayhi salam, inshallah. Brothers and sisters, majlis to commemorate the demise of Bibi Khadija salamullah alaiha will take place on Thursday, April 22nd. The majlis will be addressed by Hujjatul Islam Maulana Sheikh Rizwan Arastu, and the start time for majlis is 9 p.m. after Maghrib and Isha prayers and iftar, inshallah. Tonight's iftar is being sponsored by the families of Brother Aris Musabji and Hina Musabji, and Brother Noshad Ali and Sister Fatima Gugashia. For their sehat, salamti and barakat, please recite a loud salawat. They have requested a Surah Fatiha for all marhumeen, the sponsors' families marhumeen, especially for marhuma Reem Mukhi, and all marhum mu'mineen and mu'minat, preceded by a loud salawat. Brothers and sisters, as we get ready for namaz, as you can see, we have removed the chairs to make more space. We are slowly, gradually increasing the capacity. So we request everyone to please, as we get ready for namaz, to spread apart, at least by maybe one person between you, to make sure we have enough distance. And I'm sure Maulana can make sure that the sufficient distance is there and the namaz is still legal, inshallah.